All right, thank you all very much for joining. We are continuing our series this year on book launches. We had spectacular lineup of people prior to this, and this one is just as phenomenal because not only is the topic really engaging and very urgent, it's all about at the time of great resignation. Recruitment is number one, as we know, looking at the workforce data, the jobs of the recruiter are actually much more in demand than even software engineers, believe it or not. So that's why we're going to marry the two and see how the two engineers can help recruiters and the other way around. And that's the topic of the conversation. So we have Tomas Chamorro, Kiki Leutner from London, and then Reece Akhtar, CEO of Deeper Signals, also teaching for us here at NYU in the Human Capital Analytics and Technology program, teaching algorithmic responsibility. And Tomas, before he left us for Rome, used to also guest lecture in the classes. So without further ado, I want this amazing team to kick it off, give us a little bit of the walkthrough of why you wrote the book, what's in it, and then I have a few questions that hopefully can guide us through the further conversation on the topic. In the meantime, please feel free to post your questions in the chat because we want to make it as engaging as possible. All right, so anyone wants to get us started?
Why did maybe Kiki, yes, you should go first since you're the lead author and the leader of the revolution here.
So we wrote the book because there's been so many changes in recruitment, but also in all of us have kind of a background in personality. And then Reece and I did our PhDs in computer science too. And there was all this exciting stuff happening with tech companies entering the recruitment market and really quite substantial changes to how we recruit, but also how we assess people. So all of us would have kind of developed the self-response questionnaires, and suddenly became a very exciting job of mining data, scraping data, working with, game engineers. And we thought it's time to summarize all of that and make it accessible to, academics, but also people who are doing recruitment or entering the workforce and want to know what the different technologies are. Do they have any basis? The most important message, of course, being, yes, they have a basis in research, and yes, they're helpful for, diversity in the outcomes we're trying to achieve with recruitment. And while the skepticism has been good, it's made our field more prominent and made things sound exciting. Robots are recruiting you. We really want to show that there's a validity to it and there's a reason to use it. And we hope it's going to work out as a better way to recruit for organizations.
Wonderful. Anything to add, Tomas, Reece?
Yeah, definitely. I think,
okay, you go, Reece. You go.
Okay. I think another thing that we felt really passionate about was just talking about the science behind some of these tools. I think two things were happening. One, we saw organizations looking for more scientific, more data-driven ways to assess talent. They were becoming more aware of the biases that are in their talent processes. And then two, we see with these kind of new shiny technologies, there's a lot of hype, and behind that hype, not all algorithms or all technologies are created equally. And so what we wanted to do was to package all of that up in a very data-driven, scientific way to help practitioners really understand, okay, what algorithms, what technologies actually are valid predictors of performance, and then what do I need to do to bring those into my organizations, rather than just taking something off the shelf that may sound sexy and really interesting, but has no scientific reliability, validity, or in many ways, could only further advance, the biases that are already kind of plaguing the way that we identify talent.
Excellent. We don't have any slides today, do we?
No.
Okay, cool. It's a conversation. All right. So as it sounds to me, the way you presented, the primary audience will be the talent community, people who are actually in the recruitment business, HR, and these days everyone is in the recruitment business, right? The managers as well. So how do you explain to them why this book should be on their bookshelf? What is it in it that, what are the key insights that you came up with, other than the background of science and the business case, et cetera, et cetera? What's new in recruitment that you pulled out in the book?
Yeah, so precisely because there is so much new stuff, that's why we really recommend that anyone involved in any of the stages or in any of the steps of hiring people and trying to find a home for people's talents and potential should consult this. And, you know, just because people are generally either very prejudiced about the technology tools that are out there, especially anything to do with AI freaks people out. And there is a lot of confusion and misinformation and disinformation. And, you know, our intent with this book is to really provide a practical synthesis of what's out there and how it can be applied to basically find the right person for the right job. And, you know, I should say, Anna, that all of us, when we came together to write this, thought that it was possible to simultaneously do a book that actually helps hiring managers or HR professionals or recruiters and practitioners understand and find talent using all of the innovations that are out there, and help employees. You know, historically, there is this assumption that if you're helping the business and you're using AI or anything, that's going to be bad for job seekers or employees. And if you're helping employees, that's somehow going to disadvantage organizations. We believe in a win-win scenario. And so we wrote this book mostly for those who are interested in hiring better people and finding better people, but with the double intent of helping people thrive at work. And so the book is really dedicated to anyone who wants to improve their career.
Excellent. So you're both to the people, no, people on both sides of the recruitment process, as I see it, and which is very helpful, because given how fast, you know, people are changing careers these days, right? 18 months, I think, is the regular tenure. Both sides need to be educated on the process. And now, obviously, with the rate of change and the scale at which recruitment is happening, we can't do it without AI and some serious analytics, right? So what are the best opportunities, do you think, for the leaders today to take advantage of those new technologies and new breakthroughs in data science as it applies to people and jobs?
I think the biggest opportunity is using these technologies to implement stuff that IO psychologists have known for, you know, many years, around how do you actually identify talent? What are the types of questions you need to be asking? What are the types of the methodologies to identify the soft and hard skills that actually drive performance? And I think the reason why IO psychology hasn't necessarily been able to implement those practices across, you know, the entire world of work is because one, IO psychologists could do a better job at communicating those things, but also two, you know, the way to do it is quite hard and it's quite cumbersome and takes a lot of time and resources. Managers are overworked, they have a million things to do. The idea of asking them to then conduct structured interviews with a very standardized rubric to evaluate candidates is like out of the question. And unfortunately, that's how a lot of kind of recruitment is done, like a battlefield promotion. It's like, okay, we need someone to fill this role. This person's applied. Let's get them in, and then we go. And that obviously then leads to bias and all sorts of things because we're having to rely on heuristics. I think the real benefit of AI is that it can not only scale, but it can standardize and evaluate candidates against the same criteria. So whether it's a graduate role, whether it's a manager role, or whatever it could be in any industry, you can use an algorithm to weight, analyze, and evaluate a candidate on the same, you know, talent signals, as it were. And that way, you achieve a few things. One, you can tune that algorithm to make sure that it continues to be valid and actually related to job performance. But then two, it adds a layer of explainability to it. You can actually debug the algorithm and say, okay, well, how did and why did this candidate get a more positive evaluation over another? And then from there, you can start to work backwards around debugging and improving those algorithms to further your D&I goals, and also further tune what actually performance looks like within your organization. And that can, that's like, I think the fundamental principle. How that technology isn't expressed is much more contextual, whether that's standardized interviews, whether it's game-based assessments, and Kiki can definitely speak more to that, or if it's, CV parsing, web scraping, and so on. But I think the fundamental is AI algorithms have a way to, scale that kind of system to thinking that humans have, thereby making more data-driven, more informed, and less biased decisions.
Okay.
And also you don't even need the algorithms to have many of the benefits. So I think we're seeing technology as well, just hiring platforms and, places that even enable you to just ask everyone the same interview question and to evaluate it on the same, categories, whether, people then do it in a biased way, but at least you have the question in front of you, you have the same metrics in front of you. And we know that's best practice as IO psychologists. Trying to tell a company to do that is much harder than, having a company use the software that implements that as kind of the default practice. So there's lots of potential just in that already.
Yeah, I suspect there are quite a few people interested in more detail here. And in fact, one of the questions from Agustina is about if you could name specific applications. And obviously we are not promoting any particular system here, but maybe as a way of illustrating what you're talking about, maybe you could explain some of the examples of how it actually happens.
Yeah, I can jump in, and I was just writing an answer to you, Agostina. Rather than naming vendors, and I think your question, inquires about the stages of the talent acquisition process. I would say, and I think, my co-authors would agree, that assessment is a specific part that can be most impacted and improved by new technologies, because it's really about helping organizations improve their understanding of human potential, and people improve their own understanding of their own potential. We're still living in a world where most people are misunderstood. We all make career choices based on inaccurate, improvised, and amateurish feedback that people tell us. When our uncle or aunt say, why don't you go and be a doctor or a lawyer or work for this engineering firm? And then we regret it, and it's too late to change, And meanwhile, organizations still focus on very outdated signals or criteria, like university credentials, hard skills, whether somebody belongs to the club or, adheres to a specific culture fit, which actually propagates a lot of the biases that from a DE&I perspective, we are trying to overcome or mitigate. So I think, most of us are not lucky enough to have somebody who really knows us well guide us in our career. And most organizations still struggle when it comes to really identifying the capabilities that people have. So what we talk about in the book is really how technological innovations can improve that, not just in terms of accuracy, but also in an ethical and scalable way. And, we're very, very excited about progress in this area.
And that's fantastic. I want to build on your last point, Tomas, about efficacy and ethical applications. And I know, Reece, that's the class you teach for us here at NYU on algorithmic responsibility. So what are the ways, and I'm sure they're covered in the book, what are the ways in which the ethics should be attended to in the recruitment process, and how are we continuing to improve the kind of the controls over ethical applications?
Yeah, so I think I can speak to this, and Kiki, I know you work a lot in the space as well. So I think there's a few kind of simple principles that we first need to consider when it comes to evaluating any new assessment technology or assessment algorithm. And these these principles are actually already established and already regulated by many hiring practices. That is, the assessment needs to be reliable. That is, I'm actually getting an accurate measure of someone's potential. It needs to be relevant to the job itself. So there's no point me looking and scraping your Amazon purchase history, you know, if I was to use a web scraping type tool to then assess your fit for a job if, you know, those qualities have absolutely no relationship to one's ability to perform. And then 3, it needs to be valid, right? Do the scores on the algorithm actually predict future performance? And if those 3 things aren't there, then, you know, that's the first kind of alarm bell that should be ringing. And the third one is, you know, adverse impact. Can you demonstrate that you are, when you use the algorithm to make selections about different types of people, you know, protected groups are not being disadvantaged? And these things like the 4th ifs are already coded into EEOC laws. I think that's like the very first thing, or the 3 things you should be looking for first off. You know, and again, that's the stuff that IO psychologists have a lot of experience doing already when they create assessments. And so when we talk about how do we bridge the gap between IO psychologists, computer scientists, engineers, I think psychologists have a lot to offer because we can already bring those kinds of principles, those guidelines to, you know, the algorithms that computer scientists are making. But Kiki, do you want to like add more to that?
Yeah, so we need all of what Reece has said. And then the most important point to make is that doing nothing is the worst thing you can do for most organizations. So we know that most organizations have a problem with diversity and representation. They're also more likely than not to have flawed recruitment processes. And by flawed, I mean not based on the science that we all learn about, not structured, not standardized. People are being evaluated based on random, irrelevant things, evaluated in different ways. So the worst thing you can do is keep it how it is, right? So that's always an important thing to remember. And then implementing some of the technology will put you in a better place. And if the technology is great, even better, then you're doing even better. But it's always important to remember, I think, that often there's a criticism about technology or AI that there's bias in it, but it's not seen in the context of what we're doing without that technology. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, sorry.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, it's like, you know, I think people should be aware if they are being assessed by some sort of algorithm. I think there is a transparency and explainability element to it. If I'm giving up data to then be used to evaluate my potential, I think organizations that use algorithms to communicate that. But I think just to Kiki's point, and I see there's a few comments in the chat about, you know, do algorithms further encode bias and so on. I think organizations, before we can start to think about using algorithms to predict and shape the hiring practices, the very first step is getting high quality, you know, data. What does performance actually look like within your organization? Are you getting high quality outcome measures that your algorithm can then try to predict? A lot of times we see organizations want to use these cool, new, interesting technologies. However, they have not established a good kind of people analytics function or even a well-established HR performance management system in the organization. And so how can we predict performance if there isn't, you know, good, unbiased outcome data that we're trying to predict? And of course, we can help you do that, but that's like really the first step. Before you reach for algorithms, it's like, okay, how are you currently assessing performance? What does that look like? How are you collecting demographic data so you can make sure that your current practices are not biasing you know, different groups and so on? That's like the foundation. The algorithm kind of will have to come secondary to that. So you can't put the cart before the horse is what I'm trying to say.
I mean, that's an excellent point, and there are lots of interesting questions, but I want to just dwell on that one. You know, if people are not you know, data scientists or are technologists and can really dig in and understand the black box, how do you see the sort of the minimum skill set from on the recruiter side and the HR perspective? How do the skills of people who are operating these systems need to change to be educated consumers of technology?
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I guess there are 2 levels. On a superficial level, if people are experienced and have a mass intuitive expertise, let's say they're recruiters and they have been in the business of finding talent for some time, and they're just relatively curious and not technophobic, with a bit of common sense and self-criticism and dedication, of course, they will be able to leverage tools that, you know, have the capability of immersing themselves in the process in a pretty passive way, you know, but it's important that they understand the basics of how something functions and not just try to follow their instincts or their intuition, because ultimately they will be confronted with situations where a tool or system says hire A and they still want to hire B. You know, it's a little bit like when Google Maps or Waze says go left and you want to go right. If the tools really work, after the third time you get lost, you stop trusting your instincts. On a deeper level, it's a lot more complex. And of course, you know, especially if you want to understand the complexities and nuances of AI and AI ethics, it requires not just an understanding of data science and computer science, but also psychology, law and regulations, marketing and PR. I'll give you an example. You know, even if we could make the case for face scraping algorithms during a Zoom call or a video interview to provide an algorithmic score for people, the PR and marketing repercussions of this are serious and very heavy, you know, so you also need to understand that. And finally, I think even an awareness or understanding of ethics and moral philosophy. So, you know, it's a good example of how probably what got you here won't get you there. And it's very important that we reskill and upskill people and that they continue learning.
That's excellent. Just to stay again on the receiving end of all of these technologies, as you know, the recruitment process also sometimes tends to be, and Tomas, you mentioned that, a little bit of a political process. Yes, we can upskill our HR people, but they still have to go to the managers. So do you have any particular tips for those of us who need to bring those data to the managers, but the managers still want to hire the person who went to the same school they went to? So any particular ways to you know, nudge the organization in the right direction from the management perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you know, if you're interested in winning the battle, then we have to train HR professionals to be as Machiavellian and socially astute or emotionally intelligent, as the euphemism says, to persuade their bosses and, you know, have their way. But we're a little bit more idealistic and utopian here, and we're trying to win the war, which is to persuade organizations to be less political, less nepotistic, and more data-driven, which, as you have written many times and as you teach yourself, Anna, is really at the core of what well-intended, ethical, and competitive organizations have been trying to do for some time. So, you know, that's really our goal.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. It's not just a tools issue and not just upskilling people who are operating those tools, but that it's a systems and a whole organizational behavior shift that will need to occur. I know that in conversations, we did talk a little bit, touched on the people who are going to subject themselves to these types of assessments, et cetera, et cetera. And, you know, so far, the experience of people going through ATS has not been stellar, right? They don't get feedback, et cetera, et cetera. How do you prepare for a recruitment process where you're just going to be, you know, communicating with a machine? Are there any tricks for, you know, applicants? What kind of awareness do you bring to the process from the applicant perspective?
Shall I take this one as the person who sees all the algorithms? So we get asked this question all the time, especially with video interviews. So with game-based assessments, I think they're a bit similar to the traditional assessments. And as you know, someone with our background, we have an idea, like they want to know that I'm conscientious, they want to know that I'm smart. This is somehow how I should be answering this assessment. With video interviews, we still want to know the same things. The algorithms are still measuring the same things, but it's much less straightforward to fake it or, you know, enhance your conscientiousness. And you know, you have to really be skilled at communicating it. And people ask all the time, what are the top words I should say in a video interview? What are the top words the algorithm picks up on? And unfortunately, there is no answer, because you say so many words during your video interview that each of them is not, one word is not going to make a difference. So, you know, almost the answer is to give a good interview answer. So if you want to perform well in a video interview that is analyzed by an algorithm, perform well in a normal interview, right? As you would. So think about what's a good answer, what key topics do I need to talk about? How do I sound, you know, assertive and knowledgeable? How can I get to the point quickly? And then look at, you know, all the resources that are online to prepare for interviews. That's really what you should be doing for a video interview. Aside from the very basic stuff, like make sure that your audio is working, and you don't have massive technical issues. And if you do, then get in touch with a company and say you want to redo your interview. But other than that, that's really the best advice we can give. Yeah.
Excellent. You know, there's a lot of conversation these days about the importance of skills, right? So that the proxy of higher ed is no longer going to be that coveted ticket to better employment. How do you see skills assessments that, you know, playing out in, you know, in the development of technology for recruitment? Do we have a way to identify, especially like adjacent skills and other types of skills that are becoming sort of the currency of their recruitment and employment process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's definitely what's happening. It's easier now to like self-direct your learning. There's a million platforms you can go on now to learn really any skill that you would like. And I think the added advantage here, like we've spoken a lot today, or we really come at this from a psychological perspective, much more around your soft skills. So that's kind of where, you know, measuring personality, values, attitudes comes in. How do we codify that into an algorithm? I think hard skills are much easier to measure because they can be objectively verified. Can you solve this problem in Python or can you not? It's pretty like a binary outcome. But then also it's much easier to then have a credentialing. Like, did I complete this course? Yes or no? And I think, you know, there is got to be a solution out there whereby someone can submit or plug in all of their online learning courses that then verifies them. And then that's like what they then submit to a job when they're applying. So this idea of kind of maybe having like a talent passport or a living CV that collates our not only work history, but also our technical skills and the things that we're currently learning to then make it easier for people to not only apply for jobs, but then actually be accurately evaluated on the hard skills. But I think just to that point though, we cannot overlook the importance of soft skills as we look to see things becoming you know, more automated, and even, you know, now that everything's pretty virtual, soft skills I think are even more important. The ability to communicate, to understand, to have the emotional intelligence, to look down the lens of a camera to see your colleague and then try to understand how they're feeling, how they're thinking, I think is even more important than just the hard skills. So I think, you know, when we think about what should we be selecting for, it's of course technical skills and ability, but more so what is their emotional intelligence, the self-awareness, and also what's their potential to learn. So can we look for more measures of curiosity so they can have this upskilling tendency, yet they can still be a warm, collaborative, and rewarding person to work with.
Yeah, and Anna, you mentioned the adjacencies, and that's, you know, an important way in which technology can help. It's almost like, you know, in the way that Netflix says, well, people who like this movie that you like tend to like this one, and it can make, you know, successful recommendations that get better as they learn from you. We can also compare you or benchmark you against people who have some of your similar characteristics, but have been successful or effective in a very different career, which opens up an exciting range of opportunities. It's almost like we all have this parallel life of potential, you know, career avatars that could be unlocked if only we are assessed properly. And here's where soft skills are really important. Understanding whether somebody is good at something they have done before is easy. But knowing whether somebody could be good at something they have never done before requires, you know, quite a bit of science, data, and the right set of tools and technologies as well.
And you know, just a thought here that the same applies to the employer, the opportunities to actually track candidates across all jobs available, because you are usually like applying for one job. But if the algorithmic system can pick you up on the employer side and say, actually, you're not a good fit for this job, but we have 5 other jobs in the other department that you didn't have a chance to look at. And I see that that is making the job market a lot more efficient.
Yeah,
Mhm.
completely
Yeah.
agree. Completely agree. I
And
think
that's,
the
you know,
Go ahead,
that's not even something that necessarily needs just an algorithm, but also the technology and the system to do that, you know, because the people are not going to be that organized.
Exactly. And the good side of it as well, you know, actually a story just a couple of days ago, I was talking to one of our students. He was one of the lucky ones to get 5 offers from the best companies, and he chose one over the other. And then guess what? A year later, the company that he didn't go to actually reached out to him again and said, oh, by the way, if you're still interested, even though he wasn't applying, right? They just kind of stayed in touch, quote unquote. And by that time, he realized that he actually might want to jump and went with that company. So that creates a lot of market efficiency. If they pick up on you and you stay in the system, obviously, Reece, your area of expertise, all the ethics around keeping the data, preserving the data, and using the data ethically are all at play. Excellent. So with this explosion of, you know, the tools, do you have any shortcut recommendation for people of how to select the best ones? What are the criteria of quality that you would recommend for, again, for people who are trying to choose the best system?
Yes, first read the book.
Yes, definitely. Reading the book is a must. Yeah.
Then, you know, your evaluation really shouldn't be different from any other psychometric tool. Is it valid? Is it fair? Is it reliable? Looking at getting, you know, either IOs in your organization or yourself to look at those metrics. If a provider is unwilling to provide them to you, that's a red flag. Hopefully all the complexities that come from algorithms that we wouldn't necessarily know about or be expected to know about are going to get easier to interpret. I think in New York, they're about to pass regulation that you have to have audits on all these algorithms. So that takes it out of your hands, essentially. I think that's good news for us because it then also gives companies reassurance that what they're doing is legit, rather than the endless, you know, skepticism bubbling up of, is this really fair what we're doing? So rely on those audits. And yeah, rely on the audits and your knowledge of psychometric tests and how they should be working. And if you can, get data from your organization to figure out whether it actually worked. And take that as 2 points of information. So you could get data from your organization, it tells you your assessment really isn't working, yet you know that the assessment is valid, reliable, and fair and measuring things that matter for your job. Then you should, you know, consider both rather than saying the assessment is not working, because your data might not be great. But still, look at the data is an important step. Yeah.
And I think
Yeah,
another thing you go, Thomas.
Okay, I would say, you know, echoing Kiki's words, but, you know, mostly try to focus or prioritize external evidence. So any evidence that is published in credible sources, you know, like peer-reviewed, academic, independent, scientific journals, rather than a marketing white paper. Secondly, as Kiki said, you know, test things out, try things out. And there, the important thing is to be patient. You know, you can't do it overnight. You have to use something and study and monitor whether you end up with more high-performing people, what happens to turnover, what happens to engagement, what happens to 360 data. And the goal here is not perfection, but, you know, finding better ways of being wrong and getting it better and better incrementally. This is how successful talent management operations and organizations have been doing it. It takes a long time. And finally, I would say, you know, it's something seems too good to be true. It usually is. So, you know, don't believe everything you hear or see out there.
Yeah. And I think the only thing to add to what Thomas Kiki shared is user experience. I think using algorithms or certain types of technology for every single role, every single application is just doesn't make sense. Why would you put through your senior executives for a digital interview? It doesn't make sense. You've got the time, resources to spend that time with them. So it's like really understanding, you know, what is the type of job that you're trying to find an applicant for? or a candidate for, and then work backwards from there. And then two, it's again, what are you giving back to that individual? If I put you as a job as a candidate for a very arduous, very complicated assessment program, well, I'm going to be disengaged. I'm going to go to your competitor who has a much more enjoyable, cleaner, more frictionless assessment experience. So you always have to think about how you're using these technologies and how do they communicate your employee brand. Because if you get that wrong, you know, that could be, you could be losing talent at the very start of your hiring funnel.
Yeah, all really excellent advice here. Obviously, everyone should get the book and look at all of this laid out to you, but also get a sense of what the authors really thought behind kind of in the kitchen, right? How all of these discussions happen. Now, you know, recruitment is sort of the front door to organization, and it really needs to be integrated with a bigger talent system. And now we're seeing employee experience being front and center, with the language is changing from talent management to employee experience, which is a lot more democratic, more inclusive, right? As well as these talent marketplaces that are being set up internally in organizations to facilitate an internal mobility, et cetera. Do you envision, like in your book, do you envision the uses of these technologies inside, especially big companies, right? Multinational companies, also facilitating a much more fluid allocation of talent across different functions?
Yeah, completely. I think that's actually where there's huge potential, maybe even greater than just recruitment. Because if you think the organization is just like an ecosystem, people are generating, or their employees are generating so much data each day, it becomes very easy to then start to see, okay, well, how can I better track performance? And how can I actually give more feedback and coaching advice to my employees to elevate their potential, and not just at the top of the organization? And so I think there needs to be kind of a paradigm shift in not only just using analytics and data to, you know, serve organizational goals around, you know, driving performance, but actually how can we turn that data and give it back to the employees to actually help them understand what their strengths are, whether they're soft or hard skills, and what their gaps are. How can they become a better leader, better manager? And the only way to do that is to use data to give them accurate, unbiased feedback. All the feedback that we do receive is very kind of ad hoc, it's reactionary, it's very emotional, it's very biased. And many people go through their entire careers without getting that feedback or getting that data. So they keep making the same mistakes until they get to the top, and then they're an incompetent leader or a competent boss. So I think the biggest thing is, once you've gone into the organization, and even if we have all that data from, you know, an AI-driven recruitment process, how can we give that data back to the individual to speed up their onboarding and speed up their professional development? I think that's a huge, huge opportunity.
And the biggest, one huge opportunity for diversity, right? So we have okay parity at entry level, but then the higher you go up in organizations. So recruitment obviously doesn't just happen at entry level, even though organizations would like to say they progress internally, but still, so whether you're, you know, leaving women behind through internal selection or not bringing them in when you're hiring at higher levels in the organization, it's a huge potential.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, you know, the key goal is always to make an accurate prediction as to how an individual will behave and act when they're part of a system, right? And what has changed in the last 100 years, especially, is that, you know, in the beginnings of this science 1.0, you know, scientific management, we're optimizing just for productivity machines. You know, it was quite brutal and cruel by today's standards. Oh, can this person fit in the cockpit and the assembly line? And, you know, if they go fewer times to the bathroom, I'm going to increase my profits by, you know, 1%. And therefore, you know, I mean, it was very, very brutal, and the opposite of what we want today, which you, Anna, have written about in your great recent book, Humans at Work, +. So people should check that, right? But if we're optimizing for well-being, sense of belonging, a higher sense of purpose, D&I, cognitive diversity at the group level, and all of these things that definitely signal progress in the world, you still need to understand the person and predict how they will behave in this environment. And, I think a really good example of this is that not so long ago, organizations obsessed for hiring for a culture fit, which by definition, is the opposite of optimizing for diversity. If you only hire people because they resemble the status quo or they fit in, you won't really do D&I, diversity and inclusion. But even if you want to hire for culture add or culture add-on so that you enrich and broaden the culture of your organization, you still need to use data and understand what people will bring to the table, So I think the goals are becoming more pro-social and more ethical, and we care not just about individual productivity or even team performance, but also about health and well-being and engagement, belonging. We want people to be proud for working in an organization and joining, but you still need to have tools and data to understand them and really know deep down what they're like and how they're likely to integrate or not.
All right, excellent. So I have two questions, the bookends. One is, what is definitely going away? Is resume going away? Your opinion on that. And on the other hand, what's going to happen in metaverse? All right, so you could handle, all three of you should answer that question. So the kind of traditional resume, lining up your credentials in a certain format that is, off the shelf, and the totally new world of virtual reality, etc. How are those tools? So what's going, what's coming?
I think, well, as the phrase says, the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed. And I think that's just going to continue to reflect how HR operates for a while. We've known how to do good hiring, good development, good talent management for a very long time. Yet only a handful of organizations are really, really good at it. Some are okay with it. Many are not very good at it at all. And so the resume is still going to be here in the traditional sense. I think it will become more optimized for CV passers. I think we'll get smarter and we'll start designing CVs so they're a better way to communicate, our talents. I think, assessment, as Kiki mentioned, like more digital interviews, I think they're going to become more prevalent. And then there's going to be more technology and data on the development side. The metaverse, I think, remains to be seen whether that actually is a thing. And it's not just Zuckerberg hype. But I think, let's say just VR, let's talk about that. We really are starting to see really interesting things come out where VR is being used for training and development purposes. I think there it has the most potential, not necessarily for assessment, but for coaching, for feedback. I think VR and, dare I say it, the metaverse is really where it's going to find its feet.
Interesting. Kiki, we'll leave Thomas to the end.
So yes, I think the CV is going to stay if even what's on the CV might change. So the way we communicate our qualifications might change, courses versus universities. We all think about that working at university, right? That's going to change, but I think we'll always have a list of, our past experiences, hopefully supplemented with assessments more prominently. We know there's a huge gap in the assessment market in terms of who could benefit from it. And I think that is going to happen. The metaverse, I'm boycotting because of Mark. And once TikTok starts a metaverse, we'll be on it.
But he doesn't own it. In fact, I wrote something on HR and metaverse. I actually see Microsoft venturing more on the gaming side, right? Is kind of being maybe less of a public profile, but more substantive around how those technologies might be. But Kiki, you and I can connect offline. Tomas, everyone is holding our breath to what you have to say about this.
The first thing is to say that our book has a collection not of predictions, but prescriptions. We're not trying to say what will happen. We're trying to say what should happen. And so people should read on and see what we recommend. But if there's one thing that we hope will go, that's human intuition. I think in order to have fair, meritocratic, and, accurate and competitive talent identification and recruitment, we need to really stop relying on human intuition, which is just a euphemism for prejudice and bias. Of course, some people are remarkably intuitive because they have so much expertise that their intuition has become data-driven, but we cannot scale them. And for each and one of these, there are 100 who think they are intuitive and they're just, plainly biased. And about the metaverse, I don't know. I thought we were already in it. I have been in it for the last 2.5 years. So if there is a way out, please let me know. I just ordered, I'm going back to the old Nokia Candy phone because I'm fed up and done with it. So anyone, please find me in the analog world if you want to see me. I can't find myself there, so I hope there is a way out.
All right. Okay. On this promising note, everyone is certainly will be digging into the book. Are there any questions? Because I'm a lot worse multitasker here than. Are there any questions out? I know, Tomas, you were furiously typing that I overlooked that might be of interest to the entire audience here.
I have one I can answer. So can this technology be used to assess and match a team in an organization and build faster collaboration and improve performance? I think that's where all the improvement we've had in assessment comes together with what excites me, new technologies of measuring how people are working together internally, who's good on what projects, who has what subject expertise, who's good at talking to each other and connecting. And so actually that would have been a great answer for the far future, what comes next. And I think a lot of exciting potential there.
All right. Reece, Tomas, any questions? There was a question whether you guys are going to be at SIOP. This is for those of you who are not familiar, Society Industrial Organizational Psychology meeting in Seattle in April. So,
I'm going to be there at the HireView booth on Thursday. So you can come and get a copy there. I understand there will be free copies. Of course, they'll be gone within 2 minutes. But
yeah. Question? Yeah, Tomas.
No, I'm not sure if I'm them in person or not. If I'm not in person, I'm presenting. So we're doing a session actually on some of these things with some other colleagues. And I can't see any other questions. I mean, there is stuff on.
Everyone can sign up for a virtual because it's going to be in 2 modalities. The question here from Brad, best way to assess cognitive ability without adverse impact?
I think the simple answer is don't rely on language. I think there is a lot of great tools to measure cognitive ability that is really around abstract reasoning. So solving different puzzles, trying to leverage short-term memory, these kind of things like the MBAC test and so on. I know HireView, not to plug them, has a bunch of tools that do this. Anything that has like a language component or in your cognitive ability test is going to have bias. There's education bias comes in, there's cultural bias, and so on.
All right. Okay, this is it. I'm giving you back 10 minutes. We've been very efficient. I hope to see everyone again at our next book launch. And Nicole, do we have those slides that we want to share?
And I just to add, Anna, that in the time you're giving us back is perfect because it gives people time to go online and buy the book. I mean, it's
exactly.
just, very well thought.
Look, and we are even providing your LinkedIn profiles so that people can follow and track. I think everyone is pretty on the panel here, pretty active. Actively posting on LinkedIn. Tomas, I follow you every day. There's always something very interesting and original. And so this is where you can find the authors. I'm hearing that the book is sold out, so make sure you put in your order and it's going to come through eventually. And then our next event, Nicole, so it will be Humans at Work by myself.
Another great book, Exactly.
April 20th, with myself and Stella Lupashore. We'll share what we think about humans being at work. And then obviously follow our department. And if you want to take classes with great Reece Akhtar, Reece is teaching in Human Capital Analytics and Technology program, and Tomas regularly guest lectures for us. All right, guys, thank you all so much. Back to work for some of us, and it's, I think, the end of the day in Europe. So thanks so much, guys. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you,
everyone.
Anna. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. Nice to see you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.